Cole stepped off the transport shuttle and took his first breath of vertical station air. The orbital station called Next Prime hung in the darkness between three star systems, and it served as the home of the Galactic Integration Academy. Young members of dozens of alien species came here to learn about each other before their worlds joined the greater galactic community. Danny was 17 years old, and he was the first human ever allowed to attend. We stretched before him like a tunnel made of pale blue metal. Aliens of every shape walked past him without a second glance. Some had scales, some had fur, some looked like walking insects or floating jellyfish. Dan kept his shoulders straight and his face calm even though his heart was beating fast. He had trained for 2 years just to earn this spot. He would not let Earth down. A woman with short brown hair waited for him at the end of the hallway. Her name was Finch, and she worked as the human cultural on the station. Her job was to watch over Danny and report on his progress to the people back home. "How was the trip?" asked as she walked beside him. "Long," Danny said, "but I slept most of the way." "Good, you will need your rest. The academy does not go easy on new students, and some of the teachers here have never met a human before. They might not know what to expect from you." Had read the brief files. Humans were new to the galactic scene. Earth had only made first contact 8 years ago, and most alien species still knew very little about humanity. Some saw humans as curiosities, others saw them as primitives who had barely crawled out of their caves. Danny hoped to change those opinions. The dormitory room was small but clean. A bed sat against one wall and a desk sat against the other. A window looked out at the stars. Danny dropped his bag on the bed and stared at the view for a long moment. Somewhere out there, Earth was spinning around its yellow sun. His mother was probably sitting in their kitchen right now, drinking coffee and wondering if her son was okay. Next morning, Danny found his way to his first class. The room was shaped like a half circle with rows of seats riding up from a central stage. Dozens of alien students already sat in their places. Some of them turned to look at Danny as he entered. A few whispered to each other. Danny found an empty seat near the back and sat down quietly. He walked onto the stage a moment later. His name was Instructor, and he belonged to a species called the. He stood nearly 7 feet tall with a body covered in hard brown plates like an insect. His 4 arms folded across his chest as he looked out at the class with eyes like black marbles. "Begin our study of comparative species physiology," he said. His voice clicked and buzzed in a way that the translator in Danny's ear turned into flat words. "You will learn how different species have adapted to survive in different environments. You will learn what makes each species strong and what makes each species weak." He felt a small knot form in his stomach. He already knew where the lesson was going. A control panel and a holographic image appeared in the air above the stage. It showed a human body spinning slowly, every bone and muscle visible through transparent skin. "I have a special opportunity today," he said. "For the first time, a human has joined our academy. This allows us to study a species that is quite rare in our sector of the galaxy." Every head in the room turned to look at Danny. He kept his face still and his hands flat on his desk. "It's evolved on a small rock planet with a single moon," continued. "They are carbon-based life forms with an average of roughly 80 standard years." Near the front made a sound that might have been laughter. 80 years was nothing compared to some species that live for centuries. "Skin is extremely thin and tears easily," he said. The hologram zoomed in to show layers of human skin. "They have no natural armor, no scales, no protective plates. Even minor impacts can cause bruising and bleeding." A whisper spread through the room. "Reflexes are slow compared to most spacefaring species. Their sensory range is limited. They cannot see infrared or ultraviolet light. They cannot hear frequencies above 20,000 hertz. They cannot detect electrical fields or magnetic waves." Hologram changed to show a human standing next to several alien species. Charts appeared showing how humans ranked in strength, speed, and senses. Humans were near the bottom in almost every category. "Most notably," he said, "humans cannot regenerate lost limbs. A human who loses an arm or a leg will remain damaged for the rest of their short life. They also cannot survive exposure to vacuum for more than approximately 90 seconds, and their bodies fail quickly in extreme temperatures." And in the front row turned around to stare at Danny, were massive creatures with skin like gray stone. This one had small red eyes that gleamed with something like amusement. "Has your species survived at all?" they asked loudly. Students laughed, did nothing to stop them. He wanted to answer. He wanted to tell them about human history, about ice ages and predators, and wars that his ancestors had survived through sheer stubbornness. But he knew that words would mean nothing here. These aliens had already made up their minds about humanity. "Pain tolerance is also remarkably low," continued. "Their nervous systems are designed to produce intense discomfort from even minor injuries. That was useful on their primitive, where pain taught them to avoid danger, but in a galactic context, it simply makes them frail." This continued for another hour. Danny sat through all of it with his jaw tight and his eyes forward. When the class finally ended, he gathered his things and walked toward the door. A group of students blocked his path. The big stood at the center of them. "Called," they said. "I want you to know that I think your species made a mistake sending you here. You do not belong among real civilization." He looked up at the alien who stood nearly 3 feet taller than him. "I guess we will see about that." The grinding sound that might have been a laugh. "Yes, I suppose we will." He walked past them and out into the hallway. His hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear. He was angry. He was determined. And he was going to prove every single one of them wrong. At night, a message arrived on his desk terminal. Tomorrow's class would include a practical demonstration of human physical limitation. Instructor wanted to show the students exactly how weak humans really were. He read the message twice, then he closed it and stared out at the stars. "Okay," he said quietly to himself, "let us see what you have got." The arena was a massive circular room with walls that could project any environment. Today those walls showed nothing but cold gray metal. Rows of seats surrounded the central floor where students would demonstrate their abilities. Dan walked in with the rest of his class and found a seat near the back end. He noticed that more students had come to watch than yesterday. Word had spread about the human demonstration. The instructor stood in the center of the arena with a small device floating beside him. The device looked like a metal band about 6 inches wide with glowing blue lines running across its surface. "To the practical portion of our comparative physiology unit," announced. "Today you will see firsthand how different species respond to physical stimuli. This device is a standard metal training tool used to simulate pain responses. It is perfectly safe and leaves no lasting damage." Watch the device float in lazy circles around the instructor. He had read about these tools in his preparation materials. They work by stimulating nerve endings directly, creating the sensation of pain without causing actual injury. Medical students used them to understand what patients felt during procedures. "We'll begin with volunteers from our more resilient species," he said. "Then we will work our way down to the more sensitive ones." But immediately, The massive walked down to the arena floor with heavy steps that Dane could feel through his seat, held out one thick arm, and attached the device around it. 1 is a minor discomfort, explained. Level 5 is moderate pain. Level 10 is severe pain. The device goes up to level 15, but we never use settings above 10 for demonstration. Activated the device, stood completely still. His stone-like face showed no reaction at all. Level 3 announced, level 5, level 7. Nothing looked almost bored. Level 10. With his massive shoulders, I feel a small tingling. Is the device working correctly? After rippled through the crowd, removed the device and nodded with approval. Nerve density is among the lowest in known species. They are built to absorb tremendous punishment without distress. 4 more students took their turns. With silver skin and large dark eyes showed some mild discomfort at level 8. A reptilian made it to level 9 before asking for the device to be removed. Each time, praised their resilience and explained the biological reasons for their tolerance. And looked up at the seats where Dang was sitting. Now, the instructor said, let us see how our human guest compares. He stood up. The room went quiet. He could feel hundreds of alien eyes tracking him as he walked down to the arena floor. His footsteps echoed in the silence. Now returned to his seat. He stood near the edge of the arena with his arms crossed, watching Danny with those small red eyes. Hold out your arm, instructed. He held out his left arm. The metal band flowed over and wrapped around his forearm just below the elbow. It felt cold against his skin. We'll start at level 1, said. Please tell us when the sensation becomes uncomfortable. The device hummed. Danny felt a small spark of pain, like someone had pinched him lightly. Level 2, level 3. Pain grew sharper. Dan kept his face still. Level 4, level 5. Hurt now. It felt like someone was pressing a hot nail into his arm. Danny breathed slowly through his nose and kept his eyes focused on a point on the far wall. Level 6, level 7. Pain was bad. Dane could feel sweat forming on his forehead. His jaw was tight and his free hand had curled into a fist at his side, but he did not make a sound. His insect head, interesting. Most humans in our records show significant distress at level 5. Going, Dan said quietly. Level 8. His whole arm felt like it was burning. Dane could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to tear the device off and make the pain stop. But he had spent his whole life learning to push through pain. Football practice in the summer heat, wrestling matches where his opponents bent his joints to the breaking one, the car accident when he was 12 that broke his collarbone and 3 ribs. This new pain. Humans live with pain, and humans kept going anyway. Level 9. Heard a sound and realized it was his own breath hissing between his teeth. His vision was getting blurry at the edges. The pain was everywhere now, not just in his arm, but radiating through his whole body. Forward, the reach over and touch the device controls. Let us see what happened at a higher setting, said. Did not stop him. The device jumped to level 12, then 13, then 14. Dropped to one knee. The pain was beyond anything he had ever felt. It was like being torn apart from the inside. His whole body was shaking, and he could taste blood where he had bitten his own down. He did not scream. He did not cry. He did not beg for it to stop. The device at level 15, maximum output. Looked up at the through eyes blurred with tears. He could barely think through the wall of agony slaying through his nervous system. But somewhere deep inside him, in a place that pain could not reach, something hard and stubborn refused to break. He forced himself back to his feet. The room was completely silent. Every alien in the arena was staring at the small human who was still standing under maximum pain stimulus. And looked at, then he spoke in a voice that was rough but steady. That was supposed to hurt. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. He reached over with his right hand and pulled the device off his arm. He dropped it on the floor with a clatter that echoed through the stunned silence. The device must be malfunctioning, said quickly. There is no way a human could withstand that level of stimulus. Look at yourself, Dang said. It is working fine. Turned and walked back toward the seats. His legs felt weak and his arm was still throbbing with phantom pain, but he kept his step steady and his head high. It's hard to let him through. Some of them looked at him with shock. Others looked at him with something new in their eyes, something that might have been respect. With silver skin followed him with her large dark eyes. When Dang sat down, she slid into the seat next to him. My name is, she whispered. I am what your people might call a telepath. I sense emotions and physical sensations from others. And looked at her warily and felt everything you felt, said. The pain was real. It was worse than anything I have ever sensed from another being. Paused and her voice dropped even lower. How did you do that? How did you stay standing? Watch examined the device with trembling hands. The instructor looked confused and almost frightened. I'm human, Dang said simply. That is what we do. At him for a long moment. Then she leaned back in her seat and said nothing more. But Dang could feel her watching him for the rest of the class, and he knew that everything had changed. Galax thought humans were weak. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Sat alone in the Academy Commons that evening. The large room was filled with tables and chairs where students gathered to eat and talk between classes. Time most of them were talking about him. He could see groups of aliens glancing in his direction and whispering to each other. Some of them looked curious. Some of them looked disturbed. A few of them looked angry. He ate his food without much appetite. His arm still ached where the device had been attached, and his whole body felt tired in a way that went deeper than his muscle. Shadow fell across his table. Dan looked up to see standing there with a tray of food in her hand. May I sit, she asked. Nodded at the empty chair across from him, sat down and arranged her meal carefully before speaking again. I've been thinking about what happened today, she said. I cannot stop thinking about it. When increased the pain stimulus, I had to shield my mind from the overflow. The sensation was overwhelming. Sorry about that, Dang said. Shook her head. You do not understand. I have linked minds with warriors who have fought in battles. I have sensed the pain of injuries that would kill most beings. What you felt today was worse than any of those, and yet you stood up. You spoke clearly. You walked back to your seat. It was quiet for a moment. Then he said, where I come from, that is not unusual. That is impossible. No, it is just human. Forward with her large dark eyes fixed on his face. Explain this to me, please. I need to understand how your species can do what you did. Pushed his food aside and rested his arms on the table. He thought about how to explain something that was so basic to him that he had never needed to put it into words before. It's evolved on a dangerous world, he began. We were not the strongest animals. We were not the fastest. We did not have claws or fangs or venom. What we had was endurance and stubbornness. Those do not sound like survival traits. Are the best survival traits, Dang said. Our ancestors used to hunt by chasing animals until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. Most creatures can run faster than humans, but almost nothing can run longer than humans. We would track prey for hours or even days until it simply could not run anymore. Skeptical, but what does that have to do with pain tolerance? Pain is just information. It tells us something is wrong with our bodies. But our ancestors learned that sometimes you have to keep moving even when you are hurt. If you stop running because your feet hurt, you did not eat. If you stopped fighting because you were injured, you died. He thought about his grandfather, who had worked construction for 40 years with a bad back and never complained. He thought about his mother, who had raised him alone after his father left and never once let him see her cry. Feel pain just as much as anyone else, Dan continued. Maybe more than most species, but somewhere along the way, we learned to separate the feeling of pain from the response to pain. We can acknowledge that something hurts without letting that control what we do. He was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "Show me proof." Pulled out his personal datapad and searched through the historical archives that Earth had uploaded to the Galactic network. He found the files he was looking for and turned the screen toward. "It's a human named Glass," Dan said. "In the year 1823, he was attacked by a large predator called a bear. The bear tore open his back, broke his leg, and ripped his scalp. His companions left him for dead. He crawled 200 miles to safety over the course of 6 weeks." Stared at the screen. Swiped to another file. "This is a human woman who lifted a car off her trapped child. The car weighed over 3,000 pounds. She should not have been able to move it, but her child was dying, so she did it anyway." Swipe. "These are soldiers who kept fighting after being shot multiple times. This is a climber who cut off his own arm to escape a fallen boulder. This is a runner who finished a race with a broken leg." "This cannot be typical," said. "It's not typical, but it is not rare either. When humans are pushed to our limits, we find ways to go beyond them. We do not know how to give up." Back in her chair and said nothing for a long time, Dan could see her processing what he had told her. Across the room, the door opened and walked in with a group of other. The big alien spied Dan immediately. His stone face twisted into something ugly. "The device was faulty," he said loudly. "There is no other explanation. Humans are weak. Everyone knows this." He did not respond. He just met this gaze and held it. "Well, prove it," continued. "I challenge you to an endurance trial. 3 tests of physical capability. We will see how long your tricks last against real challenges." Connors went silent. Every alien in the room was watching now. And toward Danny, "You do not have to accept. Trials are designed for physiology. No other species has ever completed one." He stood up slowly. His arm still hurt. His body still ached. But somewhere inside him, that stubborn fire was burning again. "I accept," he said. A grinding laugh. "Then prepare yourself, human. Tomorrow you will show the whole academy what your species really is." Turned and left with his companions. Danny sat back down and found his hands were steady even though his heart was racing. "That was foolish," he said quietly. "I believe," Danny agreed, "but backing down would have been worse." That night, a message arrived from Commander Frank Perry at the Earth Military Liaison Office. The message was brief and direct. "It has reached us about your situation. You are drawing significant attention. Be careful. Some parties in the galaxy do not want humanity to succeed. They would prefer we remain seen as primitives." Read the message twice, then he deleted it and lay down on his bed. Stared at the ceiling for a long time, thinking about what tomorrow would bring. The trial would be brutal. It was designed to test creatures made of living stone. Danny was made of soft flesh and brittle bone. It was also made of something else, something that aliens like and did not understand yet. It was made of 10,000 years of human stubbornness, and that was harder than any stone. The grounds occupied a spell section of Next Prime that had been preserved for cultural ceremonies. The walls were carved from actual stone brought from them, and the air was thick and hot in a way that made Danny start sweating the moment he stepped inside. The spectators filled the viewing galleries above the testing floor. Word of the challenge had spread across the entire station overnight. Danny saw students from dozens of species crowded together, all of them staring down at the small human who had dared to accept a trial. At the center of the floor, with his arms crossed over his massive chest, 4 others stood behind him as witnesses. Academy officials had approved the trial as a cultural exchange exercise, which meant nobody could stop it now. She grabbed Danny's arm before he could step onto the testing floor. "Do not have to do this," she said urgently. "We can find another way to handle this situation." Looked at her and smiled slightly. "If I back down now, every alien on this station will believe that humans are cowards. I would rather lose trying than win by running away." Held his gaze for a long moment. Then she released his arm and stepped back. "And do what humans do best," she said. "Surprise them." He walked onto the testing floor. The stone was warm under his feet, and the heat pressed against his skin like a heavy blanket. Watched him approach with those small red eyes. "The trial has 3 tests," and out. His voice echoed off the stone walls. "Heat endurance, impact resistance, sustained exertion. You must complete all 3 to pass." He nodded. "Let us start." First test began immediately. Heat vents in the floor opened up, and the temperature in the room began to rise. Danny felt sweat pouring down his face within seconds. The air became so hot that each breath burned his throat. Across from him, looking completely comfortable. Bodies were designed to absorb and store heat. What felt like an oven to Danny was just a warm day to the stone-skinned alien. Closed his eyes and focused on his breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow and controlled. He had trained in hot environments before. He had run miles in summer heat that made other runs collapse. By sweats, that was something most aliens did not understand. Humans could regulate their internal temperature by releasing water through their skin. It was inefficient and it required constant hydration, but it worked. In the past, the heat grew worse. Dan could feel his heart pounding as his body worked to stay cool. His vision blurred and his legs felt weak. But he kept standing, he kept breathing, he kept sweating. For 20 minutes, the heat vents closed. Danny opened his eyes and looked at it. "When complete," they said. There was something new in his voice, something that sounded almost like confusion. "You may rest before the second test." Sat down on the hot stone floor and drank water from a container that handed him through the barrier. She had pushed her way to the front of the viewing gallery. "Your body temperature is dangerously high," she whispered. "I can feel it from here." "No," Danny said, "but it is coming down." Minutes later, the second test began. Resistance required Danny to stand still, while a mechanical arm struck him with measured blows. The force started low and increased with each strike. Used the test to prove the strength of their stone bodies. The first blow hit Danny in the chest and knocked the wind out of him. The second blow hit his shoulder and sent pain shooting down his arm. The third blow hit his ribs, and he heard something crack. He did not move. He planted his feet and took each hit with his jaw clenched tight. It appeared on his lip where he had bit through the skin. Bruises spread across his body like dark flowers. His broken rib ground against his lung with every breath. But he did not fall. He did not yield. Watching aliens grew silent. They had expected the human to collapse after the first few blows. Instead, he stood there bleeding and broken and refused to go down. Enough, said finally. Test 2 complete. He stumbled to the side of the arena. His vision was swimming, and every breath felt like being stabbed. But he looked up at the viewing gallery and saw something that made the pain worth it. Aliens were not laughing anymore. They were not whispering about how weak humans were. They were staring at him with something that looked like fear. Final test said, sustained exertion, we run until one of us stops. It was the simplest test and the hardest one. No tricks, no tools, no weapon. Just two beings pushing their bodies until one of them broke. They began a run. The track was a circle carved into the stone floor. Ran with heavy steps that shook the ground, his massive body moving with surprising speed. Danny ran beside him with lighter steps, his broken ribs screaming with every stride. An hour passed. Danny's legs burned and his lungs ached. Blood from his internal injuries had started to leak from the corner of his mouth. Hours passed. Movements had grown slower. The body was built for strength, not endurance. Every step required more effort than the last. Hours passed. Dan could barely see straight. His body had gone numb from the pain, which was almost a relief. He had stopped thinking about winning or losing. He had stopped thinking about anything except the next step. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. It was all he was now, just a creature that moved forward no matter what. Struggling badly, his stone skin had turned a dark shade of gray, and his breathing came in ragged gasps. Were not designed to run for hours. Their bodies stored energy efficiently but released it slowly. I'll gasp between steps. How are you still moving? He managed to answer between his own ragged breaths. Humans are persistent predators. We evolved to chase prey until it dropped from exhaustion. We do not stop. 4 hours passed. His massive body swayed, and then he fell forward onto the stone floor with a crash that echoed through the arena. He did not get up. Stop running. He stood over the fallen with blood dripping from his mouth and bruises covering his body, and at least one broken bone grinding in his chest. The arena was completely silent. Slowly, a sound began to rise from the viewing galleries. It was not cheering exactly. It was something deeper than that. It was the sound of hundreds of aliens making noise in their own ways as they witnessed something they had never expected to see. Human had defeated in a trial. Turned to look up at the officials watching from their spare platform. Instructor stood among them with his insect face frozen in an expression Dan could not read. Trial is complete, Dan said. His voice was rough and weak, but it carried through the silent arena. I believe I passed. Forward, his forearms were trembling slightly. The trial is invalid, the instructor announced. The human clearly used some form of deception or enhancement to achieve the result. Humans are incapable of such physical performance. He stared at him. After everything he had just endured, after proving himself beyond any reasonable doubt, the instructor was still trying to deny what everyone had just witnessed. Before Dan could respond, another voice spoke from the arena floor. No. Everyone turned to look at. They had pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. His red eyes were fixed on. Human one said, I felt his bones break. I saw his blood. He was in agony the entire time and he still defeated me. There was no deception. Big Alien climbed slowly to his feet and looked down at Danny. You have earned my respect, human. I was wrong about your species. Not once, then his legs gave out and he collapsed onto the stone floor. Last thing he heard before darkness took him was shouting for medical help. He woke up in the medical bay 3 days later. His chest was wrapped in regenerative bandages and tubes fed fluids into his arm. A soft beeping sound came from machines monitoring his vital signs. She sat in a chair beside his bed. Her face was tired, but she smiled when she saw his eyes open. I'm back, she said. You scared us for a while there. Tried to sit up and immediately regret it. Pain flared through his ribs and he lay back down with a groan. Doctor said you had 3 broken ribs, severe internal bruising, and dehydration so bad that your organs were starting to shut down, continued. They also said that by every medical standard they know, you should have collapsed hours before you actually did. I had a point to prove, Dan said. His voice came out as a rough whisper. Her head slowly. You prove it. The whole station is talking about nothing else. A human defeated in their own trial while suffering injuries that would have killed most species. He paused and looked at him seriously. There was going to be a formal hearing. Tried to have the trial results invalidated, but too many witnesses saw what happened. The Galactic Council has sent an observer to investigate. Spent another 2 days in the metal bay before the doctors cleared him to leave. His ribs were still healing, and they had given him strict orders not to do anything strenuous for at least a week. Danny agreed, mostly because he was too tired to argue. The ring was held in the Academy's main assembly hall. It was the largest room on the station, with seats rising in tiers around a central floor where speakers addressed the crowd. Today, every seat was filled. Students, teachers, and officials from across the station had come to witness the proceeding. Walking slowly, still moving carefully to protect his healing ribs, fell in step beside him. How are you feeling? She asked quietly. I was hit by shuttle, Dan said, but I will live. Found seats near the front of the hall. On the central floor, instructors stood with several other Academy officials. Across from them stood a tall alien with flowing robes and a face made of shifting patterns of light. This was High Arbiter from the Galactic Council. Here to address a formal protest, announced. Her voice was calm and carried easily through the hall. Instructor has claimed that the results of the recent trial should be invalidated due to human deception. The human student Dan Cole has disputed the claim. Forward, the evidence is clear. Humans are a physically inferior species. Every scientific record confirms this. The fact that this human survived a trial proves that some form of trickery was involved. A form of trickery do you propose? Asked. Well, enhancement, hidden technology, some deception we have not yet identified. Voice was sharp with frustration. It does not matter what method was used. The result was impossible, therefore it must have been achieved through dishonest means. To Danny, you may respond. He stood up slowly. His ribs protested, but he ignored them and walked down to the central floor. I did not use any enhancement or technology, he said. What I did was exactly what humans have been doing for thousands of years. We endure, we adapt, we refuse to quit. Turned to address the whole assembly. Scientists measured human weak by looking at our bodies. You saw thin skin and slow reflexes in short, but you missed what makes humans strong. Paused to gather his thoughts. This was important. This might be the most important thing he ever said. Pain more intensely than almost any species in the room. But we learn to keep functioning through that pain because our survival depended on it. We heal slowly, but we heal completely. We live short lives, but we accomplish more in those lives because we know we do not have time to waste. You look directly at. You call weakness is actually adaptation. Every limitation you identified is something that pushed us to become stronger in other ways. You cannot understand human capability by measuring our muscles. You have to measure our will. Stood up from her seat. Would like to offer testimony, she said. As a telepath, I have the ability to sense physical and emotional states in others. I was present during both the pain demonstration and the trial. You may speak. Walked down to the floor and stood beside Danny. I felt everything this human felt, she said. During the pain demonstration, the device was functioning correctly. He experienced maximum stimulus. The agony was beyond anything I have ever sensed from another being. I paused to let that sink in. In the trial, I felt his rib break. I felt his lungs struggling to work. I felt his muscles tearing and his heart straining. At any point, the pain alone should have been enough to render him unconscious. I turned to look at the assembly. But he kept going, not because he could not feel the pain, but because he chose to move forward anyway. There was no decision. There was only will. Voices rose from the crowd. Students who had witnessed the trial spoke up to confirm what they had seen. They described watching Danny take blow after blow without falling. They described watching him run for hours while visibly injured. Then stood up. Massive walked down to the floor with heavy steps. He stood before the High Arbiter and bowed his stone head. It was the one who challenged the human said, I believed his species was weak and wanted to prove it. Instead, he proved me wrong. I turned to face directly. I felt my own body failing during the trial. My lungs could not take in enough air. My muscles could not keep moving. And through it all, the human ran beside me, bleeding, broken, but still running. Voice dropped lower. I finally fell. He was still standing. I do not know how. I do not understand it. But I saw it with my own eyes, and I will not deny what I witnessed. The Arbiter was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke. Event presented today suggests that human capabilities have been significantly misrepresented in academic curriculum. The trial results will stand as valid. Instructor will be reassigned pending a full review of his teaching methods. She turned to Danny. Galactic Council would like to request human assistance in revising educational materials about your species. We clearly have much to learn. Danny nodded. We would be happy to help. Hearing ended, and the assembly began to disperse. Danny was walking toward the exit when a message arrived on his personal communicator. It was from his mother. Found a quiet corner and opened the message. His mother's face appeared on the small screen. She was sitting in their kitchen back on Earth just like he had imagined, but she was not drinking coffee. She was crying. Watch the whole thing, she said. Her voice was thick with emotion. They broadcast it across Earth. Everyone saw what you did. Felt something tight in his chest that had nothing to do with his broken ribs. I'm proud of you, his mother continued, but I am not surprised. You are Cole. We do not quit. He smiled despite himself. No, he agreed. We do not. Next morning, Danny returned to class. The hallways were different now. Aliens who had ignored him before nodded in respect as he asked. Aliens who had mocked him stepped aside to let him through. Found his usual seat in the back of the classroom, sat beside him, and had moved to sit on his other side. The Massive gave Danny a slow nod of acknowledgement. The instructor walked onto the stage to begin the lesson. Before she could speak, a young alien in the front row raised a limb. I have a question, the alien said. Is it true that humans are as weak as they look? The room went quiet. Every head turned toward Danny. Before he could respond, spoke up. They are the strongest species I have ever met, she said firmly. They just do not look like it. He smiled and settled back in his seat. The galaxy was finally starting to understand what it meant to be human.